Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. I'd love to welcome you all to Sikh Heritage Month BC. As a member of the SICRI team, I am one of the people that are based here in British Columbia, and I'm so excited to share this presentation with you today. Here today with us, we have Jasleen Kaur, one of our researchers at SICRI, and we're delving into this topic of Sahaj today, along with the rest of all of our events throughout Sikh Heritage Month in British Columbia. It's a beautiful, beautiful day out today in British Columbia, and hope it is where you are, wherever all of you are as well. I'm going to give you a bit of a background into a little introduction to Jasleen, and I will pass it over to her without further ado. So Jasleen Kaur is a double UVA grad in religious studies, focusing on South Asian religions through the lens of literature and poetry. She's currently working as a researcher with Sikh Research Institute. She is passionate about projects that create comfortable spaces for community members of all ages and backgrounds to engage in dialogue and learn from one another. She also loves singing in her free time, whether on the stage or with her friends or alone in the kitchen. She hopes to eventually go back to school to pursue a PhD in either religious and can't say the word, ethnography or history, and fulfill her dream of teaching and learning from others. Today, Jasleen is going to be walking us through her research and some discussions around Sahaj and Varma and Slokno. So please welcome Jasleen Kaur.
Hey everyone, my name is Jasleen. I realize now that I have not updated that bio in a long time, so funny to hear my own words coming back at me years later. But so I wanted to talk today about Sahaj, which is lucky because that's the theme. But I'm gonna share my screen really quickly and get started. Okay. Can everybody see that? I guess I can't hear whether or not you're saying yes. So
yeah, we can see. We're okay.
Good. Great. So today I want to talk about complicating Sahaj, which I guess is a little bit on brand for me. I think generally as humans we tend to take words and sort of define them a single way for all cases in all times. And so much of the work that I've done as a researcher at SICRI has been about complicating a lot of things. And I think I even get made fun of quite a bit for like using that word so much. It's like that and nuancing. But these things are important. So I guess to begin, before I even get into the existing definitions, I'll just give a little bit of insight into like what I've been working on and how that relates to this. So for the past couple of years, I've been a part of the SICRI Guru Granth Sahib project team, which is working on making the Guru Granth Sahib accessible to all people all over the world and kind of globally extend that message. We know that it's a global message, but a lot of times even the translation work that we've done in the past has been very situated in time and place. And obviously it's hard to get out of that, but we have a team of people from all over the world of different backgrounds with different expertise. And so it has been really rewarding and lovely to get to like engage in conversation and think through things and feel through things with that team. And it also means that we don't always agree. And so when it comes to disagreements, this was a word that we had a lot of trouble with. And I think we'll probably still be kind of fine tuning until the project is over in, 100 years. So I'm just kidding. I think it's supposed to be a 20 to 30 year project, but so I wanted to just start with like existing definitions of Sahaj that exist. And I'm only sticking to like English sources because that's where my strengths are. So we do use Shackle as a resource in this project, but we also have like Punjabi resources that we use for like dictionaries and stuff like that and commentaries. But I've copied Christopher Shackle's entry for the word Sahaj in his like glossary of terms. And as you can see, it's not like a one word definition. And like lots of words in Gurbani, especially words that are repeated, like what we see with Nam, the way that we define that word is going to change depending on the context of the line and the Bani and like the themes that we have kind of drawn from that and our own understandings. And that understanding might change depending on the day, depending on who's looking at it. So we thought a lot as a team about the different things that were available to us. There's like those two common translations that you see on like Khoj Gurbani or like Sikhi to the Max or any of the apps are the ones by Manmohan Singh and Sant Singh Khalsa. And they kind of tend to switch between like 3 or 4 different definitions. I didn't list this one on here, but there was also one that was like intuitive poise. So Sant Singh tends to add intuitive before whatever word follows to kind of ground it in that sense of meaning that it has to do something with like an inborn or inherent ability that we have. And so, yeah, so a lot of the arguments that happened, and I know argument is like is a heavy word. So I'll say the disagreements that happened on the team were about like whether or not Sahaj is just this like inherent inborn thing or whether it's more complicated than that. And I guess, I guess in any situation, the more complicated idea is usually the one that's a little bit more on the nose because nothing is so simple. But a disagreement that came up a lot was like whether Sahaj is something that you have to work towards and then you get because you work towards it, or whether it's a thing that maybe you work towards and you never get, or whether it's a thing that you don't have to do any work towards and it's just a thing that graces you. And I think for a lot of the people who have more of a background in like Gurbani research, which I wouldn't even say that I don't think that I'm like very theologically experienced when it comes to all of this. I think I position myself very much as like a seeker, and there are people on the team who definitely like know a lot more than me. And so for them, it was like, it can't be just this thing that like arrives at your door or like sits in your consciousness one day just by kind of the blessing of grace. It has to be some kind of combination of those things. And so that was the sort of crux of the conversation for a really long time. And so I started to look into Puran Singh, who I think is great. I think he's got a really good understanding of a lot of the different words that we have repeating in the Guru Granth Sahib, and does a good job of like kind of painting them with their different hues depending on what he's talking about throughout his writing. And so I looked at his work, and of course he also has multiple definitions. So these examples are just from Spirit of the Sikh. I didn't have time to like look through everything before this, but so even within, I think it's even just the first volume of that writing, he's got eternal peace, spontaneous joy and enlightenment, deep like repose, simple faith, and then effortless effort, which was my favorite. So I think like immediately kind of the understanding becomes, okay, this isn't a thing that we're going to have like a one word plug-in definition for, and it's going to change depending on what the line is kind of getting at. And so I took 2 excerpts out of his writing that I thought were really beautiful and explained my understanding of Sahaj, kind of how that's like come out of this writing too, not just the project. And so he says, for the Sikh beginning to love, and I changed it to Ek Onkar because he's old school, so he uses he, which I don't really jive with. So he says, for the Sikh beginning to love Ek Onkar is the first day of the new spiritual birth and repetition of the word and name. Not losing a single breath, a single step is the life spiritual growing through mud and dust upward, springing up like the lotus in the infinite sunshine and air above. As the newborn baby learns the language of the mother, so has the disciple to learn of the spirit and inspiration of the Guru, and in this effortless effort is the secret of living in deep musical unison with the Guru. When I was a child, I lisped incoherently, incorrectly, the name. When now, an adult, I wish to repeat the name ceaselessly. And I know that's like a lot, and the man writes run-ons and is always kind of cryptic. So I'll tell you what I think it means after I read the second bit. So the second bit says, the Sahaj of Guru Nanak is the spontaneous eternal union with spiritual verity in all positions, under all conditions, physical, mental, moral. The laws and conditions of that spontaneous bestowal of the spark of life of the spirit are beyond one's comprehension. The sinner may get it in a glance, while all the pious talkers may miss it altogether. Which, again, there's that sass that we love. But yeah, so when it comes to like effortless effort, like what does this mean? That is so confusing. It feels like it's an oxymoron. And I think a way that I've come to understand it, both from like Puran Singh's writing and also just like our conversations as a team, is like, yes, there is effort that is required. Yes, you have to put in effort. Yes, it is the thing that you are working towards. When we talk about like Shabad chiseling us, that's not a thing that just happens if we like listen to a Shabad every now and then and that's it. It requires this kind of like, I don't know, Nikki Ganinder Kaur Singh talks about like ingesting like Gurbani in a lot of her writing, and the way that it like changes your insides because you are constantly consuming it and it's like affecting your every cell. And I think that that's what we're talking about when we're talking about that kind of like conscious effort that has to happen. And so yes, there is effort, but when he uses the example of like the child, I think that's where the effortless part comes in, because the child, right, has to, when they want to say the name, they have to get through that like difficult part of trying to learn that language and trying to like say those words in the right way or say them coherently. And we see that when like kids are learning to talk, there's like that babbling period. But we also say that like when you're a child is the time when you can most quickly learn a language, right? It's like this thing that comes naturally to you, and our brains are kind of hardwired to learn language at that age really quickly. And I think that that's where my understanding of Sahaj kind of sits, is that like, yes, effort is required, but also this is a thing we are meant to do. It is an effort we are meant to make. And so it is a thing that if we put in that effort, we will be able to like reach that kind of goal of existing in that state of Sahaj. And that when we like reach that stage, that's when that kind of inherent and habitual thing that we are all capable of doing, that's when it becomes effortless. So it's like, you got to put in the work, and then it is this effortless effort from then on. It is this thing that you do because that's how you've kind of, called yourself to act and think and feel in the world. And there comes a time when you don't know how to do it any other way. Haven't gotten there yet. So this is all just like my understanding of it from my like research and the little glimpses that I've seen as a sinner. But yeah, so I think that it is this kind of that tension that we had as a team of like, is it this gift that's given to you with no effort, or is it a thing that you have to work towards and then you get? It's somewhere in between, because there is an element of like grace there. And I'll get into that when we talk about Paramaha, but like there has to be a decision on the part of Ikonkar, if I can say that, like a decision, but there has to be grace that is given to us, even if we're putting in all that effort, where Sahaj is a gift of grace. And so it's not just like, if you do this enough, it's guaranteed. But it's like, you have to kind of do that effort without expectation. And that, I think, again, ties into that kind of like that child example of like what it means to be called to do a thing. We talk about like love in that way a lot. Like, I think Puran Singh even says like, it's the kind of love that you're called to do where like if a parent walks in or out of a room, like a child is at their feet or like hugging their leg. It's that kind of thing that requires no thinking. And maybe that's where that like effortlessness also comes in. But you have to, it's like a thing that we have to return to, if that makes sense. So yes, it is part of our inherent nature to like remember. Yes, it is part of our inherent nature to praise and identify with the one, but like, look at this like human life and how much it distracts us from that thing, and how do we return to it? So yeah, I don't know, a lot of that was a lot of words, so I'm sure we'll have more to talk about about that later, but I'll move on to the ways that we have defined Sahaj. So something that we did decide to do in the literal translations, which you'll see when I share them in a bit, is we decided to keep Sahaj in its like kind of spelled out original form in the literal, because there are so many hues of it, and we didn't feel like we could do justice to the word just with a phrase in the literal. And so I'll show you in the next slide the footnote that we have that repeats throughout the project that sheds a little bit more light on our understanding of Sahaj. But this is just to kind of emphasize that in different places, in different contexts, the definition in the interpretive transcreation, so not the literal translations, tends to change and shift depending. And so we have like this element of in a natural state. We have this element of like equipoise that you might have seen in the translations that have already existed. We have like in a state of enlightenment in some places. We have Sahaj like referring to inner wisdom at some places. And then we also have this idea of effortlessness or this easy kind of thing that happens, with the giant caveat that like that's not really, it doesn't really mean that it just easily kind of happens all on its own. And then in Sulok Melanoma, even though there's no Sahaj that is like actually literally in the lines, I did want to talk about that, and we will. The like kind of references to Sahaj without saying it, and there's this idea of like steadiness that is very prevalent throughout that bani, and we talked a lot about when you're in a state of Sahaj, that kind of steadiness that comes where you are no longer like wavering with every kind of feeling and experience of all this, you know, being human. And I just put the etymology at the bottom in case anyone was interested. So yeah, so all this is taken from our Guru Granth Sahib Project website. So there's a plug, and I will probably do it again at some point. But this is the footnote we have. So the word Sahaj is a multi-connotational word whose literal meaning is sa, with, and ja, born. Its evolved meanings include easy, natural state, discretion, thought, wisdom, the supreme being, etc. Within the Guru Granth Sahib, Sahaj refers to a state of divine love and awareness that is beyond the influence of worldly attachment. When an individual continuously and consistently implements the Guru's teachings in life, the state of Sahaj is reached, which is permanently etched into the consciousness. This perpetual state of divine love and awareness is indicatively translated as inherent/natural state, intuitive poise, or equipoise. So our footnote kind of is like, we know that we've used these words, but it's not the full picture of what we mean, because we couldn't figure out a way to explain Sahaj without like having a giant explanation in every line that it appeared in, and that just wasn't doable for us. So yeah, so it's like what I was saying before, this kind of effort that goes in until we've reached a state where we can kind of exist there effortlessly, where that is our habit. And it doesn't require effort anymore because we've done all the kind of work of like chiseling ourselves in that way. So yeah, so I wanted to talk about Sahaj and Baramaha. And I've just included 4 sloks where the word comes up. And I'll just talk a little bit about my understanding. And again, during the like Q&A portion or the discussion portion, I'd love to like hear what other people get from this, because I do think that our understandings are very much about like our own paths and our own relationships with Bani. So yeah, so I think this is Sulok 4. Yes, Sulok 4. So this is the first time that it comes up, and it's before we even get into like the seasons or the months in Baramaha, and it says, there rains a stream of Amrit of pleasant droplets, where love with Hari. So we've translated Hari as either the all-pervading or the one light, depending on which thing you're looking at. So in the interpretive, we say Ik Onkar with a footnote that gives all the different names of Hari, and then in the commentary, which I write, I kind of got the option of going with one light. So I did do that in the commentary. But where love with Hari has happened and dearest friend has met human bride, so that's the seeker, in Sahaj through devotion. So this kind of constant stream of Amrit is a thing that happens to the seeker who has met the friend, the husband, the spouse, the one light, in that state of Sehej through devotion. So in this, I think we said in a natural state in the explanation. And again, with the caveat that like, yes, it's a natural state, but she's had to work for that, or he's had to work for it, or they've had to work. I mean, the seeker is any of us, but so it's interesting to me that this comes at the beginning. And I guess it's more of like a framing of the next few months or the next many months where we watch the seeker absolutely like affected by the outside world and like wavering with every other month, just like longing and longing and longing and wondering why they haven't felt that kind of connection. And so to frame it that way, I think that's how I understand it, is like, this is a thing that happens, but there's all this effort that has to go into it. And it's kind of setting up this like series of saloks where we watch all this effort being put in by the seeker who is like separated, which we know is like an illusion of separation, but who feels separated from the one and is like constantly just wondering why they haven't had that union. And so in the next salok, in salok 5, it's in the final line. So it says, the message through Chit is that the human bride can find comfort in Sehej if she finds Hari, husband, dwelling in home heart. So I know the literal is a little bit like clunky, but we try to keep it as literal as possible. So yeah, so the seeker can find comfort in that state of however you understand it. So I would say it's in a state of kind of like natural, like intuitive understanding at that point. And we're all going to like have different understandings of what Sehej is based on where we are. But it's this kind of understanding or this knowing that is rooted in all of us that we just have to kind of get back to and find. And if she can find comfort in that knowing, which she's had to like work to get to, then that dwelling of the husband or the spouse comes back into the being. And so it's not that like Ikankar has like left us and the only way to get Ikankar to like come back over is to like do all this chiseling, and like there's this kind of like requirement to being graced. And so that's again where that tension comes, because there is an element of grace in arriving at Sehej. And I don't think that anybody on the team really fully understands it, because I don't think anybody on the team has gotten there yet. But based on like the conversations we've had, I think that that's the understanding we've come to, is that like there is this element of grace that must happen. And all that like chiseling and all of that effort that goes into like remembering and praising and identifying with Ikankar is really important, because that's what kind of, there's like the later saloks in Baramaha that talk about this kind of like preparing of the home, like what you would do if a guest was coming over, and just wanting everything to like look nice and singing praises. And in that line, the seeker is like, why hasn't the one come to my house? I've like been doing all this stuff. I've been doing all this effort, and I've been trying really hard to like prepare my home, prepare my heart for the one to like arrive. Kind of like this idea of you want to like make your home heart so beautiful that like the one has no other choice but to come and dwell there. But even in that framing, we were like, well, does that mean that if we like do it, then we're owed some kind of grace, or we're owed some kind of presence? And that didn't feel right either. And so it's like this idea that like we ought to be doing these things anyway because of love, like because we love the one and we like want to do these things anyway. We're called to do these things anyway. And maybe, yes, that requires a lot of effort, because when we're out in the world as human beings, it's easy to forget those things. And easy to kind of neglect that, or like separate our spiritual lives from like the rest of everything. But it doesn't mean that if we do those things, we're owed a quote unquote visit or owed a feeling of connection. It's like this moment happens when the one has decided that it's going to happen. That's like a frustrating thing. But that was another thing that we had talked a lot about as a team. And so I think the next thing I wanted to talk about is like what happens when we use Sehej as like naturally. Because again, that has to be like, there has to be so many kind of like things that we contextualize that word with. And so in this line, we had the lamp of wisdom lights naturally if it is lit through the essence of wisdom. So the caveat was like given within the line, which is why we were able to use the word naturally. And so it's like, yes, that lamp of like the presence of the guru and like having that understanding because of like having done all of that work. Yes, it does light naturally, but like there is all this stuff that has to come before. And I mean, this is Slok 12. So, you know, the seeker has been struggling for a while, has been longing for a while. And I also think that something that, that I've thought a lot about with this Bani is like the benefit or the value of going through that time and going through that, like that kind of longing that is sometimes so frustrating that it makes you, you know, want to cry or wail or whatever. But without that, like we have no kind of like fuel, I guess, to keep doing that work, because the work is hard. It requires that effort. It's not like an easy thing to like decide to put effort into getting back to a state that like every part of being human tries to distract you from, which we'll talk a little bit more about in the Slok Milanova bit, but like it's really hard. And so having that kind of like desperate longing that is like rooted in like absolute love and maybe even frustration sometimes is like the thing that kind of keeps us coming back to putting in that effort. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just like my experience. And so that was like another thing that I think complicated like my idea of like what Sahaj is, that it's not just like, if I do these things, you will come. It's very much also about grace, and also very much about the importance of longing and the importance of this feeling of separation that we know is not real. We know that the one dwells within us at all times, but like having that kind of those periods or those stretches of longing for even a glimpse, those are the things that keep you kind of trying and keep you like ready to put in all of that effort. Yeah. So then I wanted to include the 17th Salok where there's this kind of resolution. And I'll read the whole thing because I think that, it's a great conclusion. Well done to the Guru. But that says 12 months, all seasons, lunar dates and days are auspicious. All moments, auspicious times and instants become true when divine husband came and met the human bride through inner wisdom. When dearest beloved Prabhu met the human bride, all affairs were resolved. The Creator by own self knows the entire way of union. The one who has adorned her, to that one alone she became endearing. Union took place. She enjoys the color of love. When the divine husband enjoyed her, heart bed and her body home became beautiful. By becoming Guru-centered, fortune has shone on her forehead. Nanak signature, day and night the beloved enjoys her, and she has found the Hari husband of eternal marital bliss. Yeah, so it's just, I don't know. I think that conclusion kind of cemented a lot of things for me. And we work on these things for like 3 months at a time, sometimes more. Baramaha was a lot more because it was a much more difficult one for us to do as a team. Our team is mostly men, and this was the first Bani we ever did that was uttered in the feminine voice. And that's a difficult thing for people to put themselves into when that's not the voice that they know. It's not the voice they speak with. And so much of my understanding of like having the goal of reaching a state of Sahaj, and also just like what it means to be a seeker and what it means to long and what it means to like do something with that longing, has come from like the work that we've done on this Shabad or in this Bani, because it was the first time that I like felt like I could hear myself a little bit more clearly, and felt like the voice that was being used here was one I could relate to, because it is in the feminine. And so I think like this conclusion of like all of these different times, right? Because she goes through, or the seeker goes through all the different times of the year and is like, well, this month is difficult because of this, or this month it's like so dry outside and hot, and I don't understand how I can, feel the presence in this month. Or if it's like a good month where everything is blooming, then the seeker is like, everything is great outside, but I don't feel this way. How do I get the outside to affect my internal? And it's this constant like dialogue that's happening between her internal state and the external state. And that conclusion of like reaching a state of Sehej involves some kind of shift that happens where the like internal is not a thing that is affected by the external anymore. Where we can go through the seasons and all of the things that they present to us externally, we can observe the outside world as it changes and wavers and fluctuates all around us, and we can stay steady. And there is that like idea of steadiness that's really prevalent here. There's a moment when the seeker stops wavering and can start to appreciate all of the things that are around them through the changing seasons without having it affect their internal sense of connection. And that doesn't necessarily mean that they always feel the presence of the one. And I think that's really important to like remind ourselves of, because we think like getting to a place of even starting to understand what Sehej feels like, we think that it has to be like we suddenly become these like uber enlightened beings who are just like all good all the time. But I don't think that's it. I don't think that it's necessarily that the seeker reaches a state where they constantly feel connected. I think maybe in its ultimate kind of final form, sure. But when I think about like Shabad's like Kuchaji, Suchaji, Gunvanti, like that trio of Shabads, the switch that happens when the seeker goes from being without virtue or being without grace, right, Kuchaji, into Suchaji, into one who knows the way, who is graceful and who is full of virtues. It's not that they still feel connected all the time. Like that's not what has changed. It's that when they don't feel connected and don't feel the presence, they have that understanding that like this too is part of it. And this too is important for me because I need to have that sense of longing. And I know intellectually that you are here, but I don't feel it right now. And I'm not going to like beat myself up about it or ask why. I'm just going to kind of ride this wave. Like it's truly just like a change in perspective and a change in understanding of what Hukum is. And like, I think that understanding is coming from a state of Sehej where like they're no longer wavering, not just at the external world, but also about not wavering at whether or not internally they feel connected, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's Paramaha. And I wanted to talk about kind of implied Sehej, if I can say that, in Slok Melanoma. And so the kind of understanding that I have of what Sehej looks like in our lives, in like practice, is again this like unwavering, this steadiness of our unwavering kind of way of being, or the steadiness that we have when it comes to dealing with all the kind of perceived sort of binaries and things that are at odds with each other in the world. And so I included these sloks because I think that does a good job of kind of telling us what it can feel like if we've reached that state of not feeling like happiness and sorrow affect us in the same way that they do when we're not in a state of Sehej. And I'll elaborate on that in a bit, but not being like affected, like severely affected by praise or slander, where like you kind of respond to those two things in the same kind of even way, or where, things that are precious like gold and not so precious like iron become kind of equal in your perspective. And the classic happiness and sorrow, which we all talk about and all kind of wrestle with, like those things don't affect the mind, and friends and enemies become equal in our perspective. And I think, so here, this idea of the kind of effects of Sehej, which are tied again to remembrance and praise and identification, because that's what the Guru repeats throughout this bani. Those effects are effects that point to a kind of liberation. And that's what the Guru says in these lines, is like, not only do you become an embodiment of the one, you become free. And it's this freedom and this carefree way of living that kind of takes over when you're able to be unwavering in that way, when you're able to return to your natural inborn state or your inherent state when you've put in that effort. And I think when I was working with this bani with a team in the beginning, I was like, oh man, is Guru Tegh Bahadur Sahib telling us that we have to be like kind of unfeeling and just kind of like apathetic about everything? And that like really didn't seem to make sense to me. And I think a lot of us struggle with like trying to figure out what that means in a way that doesn't feel like, I don't know, like we're like ascetics wandering into the forest and never coming back and kind of like letting go of all attachments. And so this kind of understanding of what it means to be detached, I think also ties into like what it means to be in a state of sahaj. And it's not a detachment that is what we would think of in the kind of classical like Indic traditions of, you know, you got to get away from here and not come back and kind of just concentrate on your spiritual life. It's not like that at all. And it's this difference in my understanding. And in my understanding, it's this difference of not being driven by our emotions in the same way, not being driven by the things we experience in the same way. So like, let's say somebody slanders me because they hated this presentation, they slander me. Does it drive my actions after that happens? Or is it a thing that I can kind of be like, that hurts, it's not fun, but I'm not going to like respond or react in a way where like my entire day is derailed by this like experience. And the Guru says the same thing about losing things, and being free by being able to understand that the things that we have are not ours. And so they're not ours to lose. And there is this kind of carefree thing that takes over when we're able to have that emotional understanding, not just like logical understanding. And so, I understand these kinds of effects that he lists as effects of being in that state of sahaj. I just put in the two slokas where he talks about like detachment, the garb of detachment and becoming detached from all desires. So just elaborating on that, I think a lot of times we're like, oh, well, we're not supposed to be attached to our family or our things, or like, we're not supposed to like have any kind of emotions attached to those things. There's some people who argue that. And I think sometimes we forget that like the Gurus were very much of the world and in the world and had lots of things and had family, but it's that when they lost those things, they were able to keep that kind of steadiness, and return to that understanding that like, yes, I've lost these things and maybe I'm sad about it. I don't know. Maybe I'm sad about it, but that's okay. And it reminds me a lot of like, I'll bring it back to Buden Singh because that's, you know, why not be predictable? But he talks about this, the compassion of those like enlightened beings. And he talks about like the way that the Gurus very much felt. It's not that they went through the world being apathetic or emotionally detached from anything. We know that, right? They felt the pain of so many people and acted on that. And so he talks about how that kind of compassion is not one that causes us to paralyze ourselves or wallow, but it's a compassion that leads us into action. And so it's not about feeling nothing. It's actually so much of what it means to become like a lover of the beloved, and to invite that kind of presence into our lives in a constant way, to chisel ourselves in that way and reach that state of like constant union and constant remembrance and praise and identification. Like so much of that is about feeling and opening ourselves up to not just our feelings, but the feelings of people we don't even know. But it's that, like, once we've opened ourselves up to that, what do we do with it? And I think that's where the state of Sahaj comes in and is really important, because it's not that we sit there and cry about it and then we're like, okay, I've done my feeling, it's done. It's like, okay, how do I act with this compassion? I feel this pain and I want to do something about it. What do I do? And it's that movement from just feeling into doing that I think Puran Singh really like hits home. And so, yeah, so I think, all that stuff really just has tied into my understanding of Sahaj. And then I included the last part because I thought this was something kind of cool. So I just thought I'd include it. In the 24th Salok, there's the, one of the like names that is used for Ek Onkar is Narayan. And we had a lot of discussion as a team about like what that word implies. And so there is this sense that like Narayan is this like primal being, like the first thing. But in like Hindu mythology, which we know the Gurus were well aware of, in Indic mythology, there are these ideas of like Narayan, not just as the primal being, but as the primal being who like rests on the like celestial waters of the world. And it made a lot of sense to us because the line before says, for the sake of Maya, the being is wavering, always wavering. And there's so many references to like wavering and water within this Bani. And when we talk about like the way that the water can move and change in an instant, right? Like it's why people like at Great Falls, near where I live, they're like, don't dip your feet in the water because some like, you never know what kind of tides are going to come in. And it's kind of unpredictable. It's this kind of alive thing, this ever-changing thing. And if you're not careful, it can kind of swallow you up. And so I've thought a lot about like the waters of the world. We talk about the world ocean all the time, but this kind of thing that we are sitting in and how it's constantly moving in ways that we don't always see the full picture of. And to invoke this like idea that Ek Onkar is this ever steady one, this one who is able to sit still on these like wavering waters. And that's the one we ought to like rely on for support. I think very much is about kind of a hint, I guess, of what it feels like to be in that state of Sahaj constantly, and to be steady, to be like steady and in remembrance at all times, so that yes, you feel the things, and yes, sometimes it is painful and sometimes it is hard, but you can kind of constantly remember the like bigger picture and remember that like, yes, these things are hard and this being human is not easy, but like there's a bigger, like vaster thing that is taking place, and we can get to that place of like steadiness if we lean on the one. So yeah, that's what I have to say. I didn't have any like closing thoughts or questions to leave you all with, because I'm sure we'll talk about it in the next however many minutes, but I just wanted to say thank you. And I'll turn it over to Anu.
All right. Thank you so much, Jasleen, for that presentation. I think this concept of Sahaj, or inner peace, I guess we could even say, is something I think, especially the way the world is working right now, and the constant state of heightened what's happening next, this has been a great reminder that looking inside and turning to Bani to help us guide us through this. As I was sitting here listening, I was thinking about myself, and I'm like, where do I find Sahaj? So, as we wait for people to fill in their questions or raise their hand and I can unmute them, I want to ask you a couple of questions.
Sure.
so you've gone through what Sahaj means in terms of Gurbani, and what does it mean to you personally?
I think I'm still figuring it out. I think it's like this constant thing that I'm trying to figure out. And I see like glimpses of it sometimes, but it's I mean, I'm nowhere near there, man. So I can't tell you what it is. I can just tell you that there are things that I have experienced in my life where they absolutely wrecked me. You know, I mean, the classics are, you know, death, as we all go through. But I remember like my experiences with death as a kid, and even as like a high schooler and like a college student, it would like affect me less. It swallowed me a little less, my grief. But I think like in the recent past, when like things happen, whether it's like personal things or just like, you know, the global apocalypse that is happening, I do feel like more of a sense of calm, and more of a sense of like, okay, this thing is horrible or this thing is sad, but like, what do I do with this feeling? And I don't think that I always had the ability to do that, and I don't think that I still always have the ability to do that, but it is a thing that I find myself doing more often, and trying to understand how to hold kind of that like steadiness in one hand and the urge to move in another, if that makes sense. But I think like something that's happened with like Guru Granth Sahib Project, which is really lucky because it is my job. It's part of my job, but it's kind of like tricked me into immersing myself in Bani, where before I kind of felt like that was, you know, not a thing that was for me, or like required too much effort, or like that wasn't really my vibe. And now it's like the thing that I think has gotten me through the last 2 years. Like I'm just thinking about like the pandemic and all of the things that came with it, and just all of the things in the world that I'm like, it's all on fire. But I don't think I would be feeling the way that I feel if I didn't have all of that immersion, and if it hadn't in some way changed me from the inside out. I don't know exactly what it has done yet, but it's definitely done something. And I think like those glimpses of Sahaj that happen are very much like, wow, I'm responding to this in a way that is a lot healthier than I thought I would. Or wow, I'm able to like feel this thing and then, you know, keep going. Because I think sometimes our like grief or any of our feelings can paralyze us. And so having way less kind of like bouts of paralysis has been really nice. Which is not to say that I don't ever feel like deeply swallowed up by certain things, but I think the period of time has gotten a lot shorter where that happens. Yeah.
I can relate. Definitely. I mean, it was only a couple of weeks ago, I was driving home, and a lot of our radio stations in Vancouver play Kirtan straight from the Gurdwara. And I just happened to land on one of those stations, and I just found myself crying because it was this feeling like getting lost, and I'm like, we don't have anywhere to connect, and we don't have anywhere to do this, and all the old people would meet at the Gurdwara, and we would go, and you know, and then losing that. And I think I actually started focusing. I'm like, get with it, you know, get a hold of yourself, and started listening to actually what the Kirtan was about in it. And it's this, all of a sudden, this like sense of calm comes over you. You're like, wait a second, we're okay, like we will get through this. And that feeling of Sahaj and calmness, it comes over you. And so, you know, you find yourself, especially over the last, like you said, 2 years for yourself. And for me, it's been this last year, and it's these ups and downs. And, you know, I think we come out of all of this stronger with the strength of Barney and this type of sharing that we're doing. So I really appreciate you sharing your story, because I think that really does help all of us in coping and understanding what's happening in our world as well. So thank you for that. So I guess like the next question is there something that you do in particular that kind of refocuses you to this idea of Sahaj?
Yeah, I actually, this is going to sound very new agey, but just bear with me. Well, maybe not. I feel like this is common now, but when the pandemic started, I mean, I was absolutely a mess last year. And I was like, what do I do? And my mom was like, try meditating. And I was like, I'm not going to meditate, you know. And I think I even was like, Sikhs don't meditate, which is like not even true. But I remember we had done like our Vaisakhi online series, and I was talking about, just the way I was feeling. And it was just like a lot of doom. And Inni Kaur had told me to like reread Spirit Born People by Puran Singh. And he, you know, really helped. And also something that he had written about like meditation was really helpful, because he was like, the meditation that I'm talking about is not this dead meditation or this dead recitation of the name. Like, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like a creative like force that goes through you and like pours out of you and is very active. And so I was like, all right, I'll give it a try. And so I started doing that, and I would like do my path every morning, which like if you had told me even a year and a half ago that was a thing that I would be doing, I'd be like, you got the wrong Jasleen. But yeah, I started just doing like Japji Sahib, and then also listening to Jap Sahib because I don't know the words. But that was like I like had the like translation as like maybe as flawed as it is pulled up, and being able to kind of start every day with just like naming the attributes, naming the names of Ek Onkar, and like kind of picking a thing to remember for that day or that week, something that like spoke to me about like an attribute of Ek Onkar. Like that is also remembrance, that is also praise, that is also identification. And I think sometimes we feel like we have to do like 50 things in order to like remember. And it's like you don't. And even with the Guru Granth Sahib project, like Badamaha, for example, so it's long, and there's like many different ideas and different lines that could have spoken to me, and the one that did for like months was just a phrase of like the repeated phrase of like, come into my heart. And it's this constant ask. And I was like, I would find myself like meditating, and I would like hear it echo in my brain, because all I wanted was to like feel that connection and that presence, but I wasn't feeling it. But something about that phrase repeating again and again really got me through a lot, because it was like, yeah, I'm gonna long, I'm gonna like yearn for this connection, and that's okay. That's nothing to be ashamed of. And so a lot of times I've found, especially with this project and like working on different things for a long period of time, the thing that like speaks to me will just be a line or a phrase or even a word. And I'll just sit with that for like a month or like however long I need it. And it just does something to you. I don't know. It's that chiseling that we all talk about, but it really does something. And, you know, there are like weeks when I haven't done my path or I haven't meditated, and instead of like doing the thing that I think a lot of us do and kind of beating myself up for it, I'm just like, okay, well, I didn't feel like I had time, or I didn't feel like I wanted to, which is a harder thing to admit. And I remember talking to Harinder Singh and Surinder Paul Singh at some point and being like, do you ever go through just moments where you don't want to do it? And they were like, that's normal. Like, it's normal to not want connection, because you have to go through that to get to a point where you're like, oh, wait, I really need that actually. Yeah. And it starts over again. And it's this kind of constant sort of like play that happens in your relationship with Ek Onkar. And I think without that, you don't have that urge. And the urge is like what makes the union so much sweeter, is like, even if maybe I'm saying come into my heart for like a month, every day for a month, I'm like, come on, And then when I get even a glimpse, I'm like, oh my God, that was amazing. That felt great. That was like the greatest thing that has ever happened to me. And then it's gone again. And I'm like, all right, well, see you next time. It's just like this. Yeah, there's something about it that, and I think even that appreciation for the moments of feeling disconnected is very new for me, because for a long time I was like, but I don't have it and I don't feel it. And I feel it sometimes and then it's gone so fast. And that became like such a negative thing for me. And now it's like positive because I know what's coming next. And like the thing that will come next is the amazing thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Yeah. Even just like a line or a phrase, if people can find something that resonates with them and hold on to that, it'll do something for sure.
Absolutely. As you were talking, I was thinking about myself and I'm like, yeah, you go through these cycles. And I think that this is kind of that conversation that we don't have with others. We kind of do it in ourselves, and then we're guilty for that disconnect. And we forget that, we're human beings. We have emotions. We have things that go through us. We have those moments where we're connected and not connected. And, and for those of you who are thinking that, you've got to sit down and translate and get connected and fully, like Jasleen said, sometimes it just takes one line, one word. And, I found that myself. I know that I was teaching, I teach high school, and the one line that I held on to for so long in my classes was, I was teaching Science 8, and we were talking about the solar system or something. I don't know, one of the kids had brought something up, and I kept remembering this line in Jakshi Sab that's talking about Dharti Pare Hor Hor, and we've got this idea of these planets and these stars that go beyond. And, the scientist in me was just like, see, Gurbani's even talking about science. And, we're talking about these vast things that are out there. And, I actually ended up talking to one of my classes about this. And it was just, it's so neat to be able to connect in so many ways, and what brings you peace out of that. And how you see whatever is spoken to in Gurbani kind of come to life literally in front of you. It's a very powerful sense of calm, I can say.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. If there's anyone else out there who would love to jump into this conversation, please let us know. You can raise your hand and I can unmute you, or you can pop your questions into the chat. We'd love to have you part of our conversation here. It's funny. I'm even with this conversation, it's bringing me a sense of peace and calm. It's like I said, this is about that. It's not that we need permission to be able to do this, but when someone says it out loud, it's almost like, okay, I can do that. I can do the same, and I can bring the same sort of thing into my life. So I really, really appreciate the conversation and the information that you've brought to us. And hopefully this brings a sense of peace and calm into everyone else's lives as well. I'll just wait for another minute here or so for anyone else who has any questions. But we'd really love to thank Jasleen for our presentation today as part of Sikh Heritage Month. And on behalf of all of us, thank you for joining SICRI at for this presentation. Please keep in mind that SICRI is always presenting and doing webinars and a whole bunch of other things to come. Civic, my main thing at SICRI is lead for the Civic program. You can find more information at sicri.org or on our Instagram page or Facebook, including all of the webinars and things are all also on our YouTube channel. And so with that, and there are no other questions here, I'd like to thank Jasleen and all of our participants today. Vaigur Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaigur Ji Ki Fateh.